A man is startled by a loud knock at his door on a freezing winter night. When he opens it, he finds a trembling dog, desperate for warmth and survival. What happens next is unbelievable. It was a bitterly cold winter night. The snow fell in heavy, relentless flakes, coating the world in a blanket of white. The wind howled like a wounded animal through the trees, its icy breath rattling the windows of the small, isolated house. Inside, the warmth of the fireplace crackled, offering a sense of comfort and safety that stood in stark contrast to the wild storm outside. The man, in his late 30s, sat in his worn armchair, a book open on his lap, though his mind was far from the pages. He had long since gotten used to the solitude of his rural home, nestled far from the nearest neighbor and far from the distractions of city life. Yet tonight, something felt different. A strange stillness filled the room before the first soft knock came. Hesitant, almost unsure, the man paused, the sound barely piercing the storm's fury. Who could possibly be outside in such dreadful weather? His curiosity tugged at him, and he set the book aside, moving toward the door. The door creaked open with an eerie groan, and the man's heart skipped a beat. There, in the doorway, stood a small dog, trembling violently from the cold. Its fur, once a rich golden color, was now matted with snow and ice, sticking to its skin like a second layer of frost. The dog's breath came out in shallow, uneven gasps, each one visible in the freezing air. Its eyes, wide, soulful, and pleading, locked onto the man's with an intensity that spoke volumes. The little animal didn't move. It stood frozen in place, as if it didn't have the strength to take another step. The wind howled louder, but the man's world had narrowed down to just the dog, this pitiful, shivering creature that had somehow found its way to his doorstep. The man instinctively took a step back, his mind racing with confusion. How had this dog ended up here, alone and on the brink of collapse? He had never seen it before. There was no collar, no signs of an owner. The idea of taking in a stray, especially in such a harsh storm, was not one he took lightly. Yet as he looked into the dog's eyes, something inside him stirred. It wasn't just fear, it was a pull, a deep sense of empathy he couldn't shake. He couldn't just shut the door on it. The dog's body swayed, barely able to hold itself upright as it took a tentative step forward. The wind whipped around them, howling in fury as if the storm itself was trying to push the dog away. The man hesitated, his heart torn between practicality and compassion. The choice felt heavy, but one thing was certain. He couldn't leave this dog to fend for itself. The man stood there, his heart racing, torn between two competing instincts. His mind screamed caution. What if the dog was sick? What if it had been abandoned by its owners, left to fend for itself in this brutal cold? There were countless possibilities, none of them reassuring. He had never been one to trust animals he didn't know, especially one that appeared so fragile and vulnerable. What if it's a trap? He shook the thought away, feeling a shiver of doubt creep into his chest. But the dog needed help. He couldn't just leave it out there to die in the storm. The dog, barely able to stand, took a halting step toward him. Its body wobbled, the cold having drained every ounce of energy from it. The man's heart softened. He felt a tug at his chest as memories of his old dog, his companion for so many years, flashed through his mind. He had lost her to old age, and the pain of that loss still haunted him. But this was different. This dog, shivering on his doorstep, reminded him of the bond he had once shared with his own pet. And in that moment, the man couldn't bear to leave it outside. Taking a deep breath, he stepped forward, kneeling down to the dog's level, his hand extended slowly, trembling just slightly as he reached out. The dog didn't flinch. Instead, it crawled toward him, its body weak but trusting. The man scooped it up carefully, cradling the fragile animal in his arms. With one swift motion, he slammed the door behind him, cutting off the howling wind and snow. Inside, the warmth of the house enveloped them both. The man's heart swelled with a sense of quiet relief. As he looked down at the trembling dog in his arms, he whispered softly, almost to himself, "You're going to be okay." He ran a gentle hand over the dog's cold head, watching as its tremors slowly subsided, the warmth of the room slowly working its magic. The dog's eyes fluttered shut, and for the first time since arriving at the door, it seemed to relax. The man smiled softly, feeling a bond form between them, one that in this quiet, storm-swept night had only just begun. Time passed slowly, the house settling into an uneasy peace. The man worked quietly, preparing a makeshift bed for the dog near the heater. He watched as the little creature's breathing grew steadier, less labored. The warmth of the room was doing its job, and the dog's shivering finally began to subside. But despite the relief, something didn't sit right with the man. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was something strange about the dog, something just beyond his grasp. As he sat watching, his gaze fell once again to the dog's collar. The worn fabric and frayed edges suggested it had been through a lot, but it was the small gold tag that caught his attention. The tag seemed to shimmer in the dim light, drawing his focus. Curious, the man leaned forward, carefully lifting the collar to examine it more closely. His heart skipped a beat as the tag came into full view. The name on the tag was unmistakable. Max. His breath caught in his throat, and a rush of memories flooded his mind. Maximum, his childhood dog, the loyal companion who had been by his side through thick and thin. He had lost Max years ago in a car accident that had torn his heart apart. But this dog, this freezing, desperate animal, looked exactly like Max. Impossible. It couldn't be. But as the man stared down at the tag, he couldn't deny the overwhelming sense of recognition that gripped him. His fingers trembled as he whispered the name, almost in disbelief. Max. The dog, now lying contentedly on the bed, lifted its head slowly. It locked eyes with the man, eyes filled with something he couldn't quite place. Recognition? Could it be? The storm outside howled louder, as if urging the man to face the questions swirling in his mind. How could this dog have survived all these years? Why was it here now? His mind raced with the impossible possibilities. But the connection, the bond he felt in his chest, was undeniable. This dog, this Max, was no ordinary animal. The answers eluded him, but one thing was certain. The reunion of a lifetime had just begun. As the night wore on, the man began to notice something unsettlingly familiar about the dog's behavior. It followed him from room to room, staying close by his side, never straying far. The way it kept its gaze fixed on him, as though waiting for something, made his heart ache with the memory of his old companion. Max, he thought again, his mind still reeling from the previous revelation. But this dog wasn't just a ghost of the past. It felt like Max, moving like Max, as if it was trying to communicate with him, urging him to remember something. Eventually, the man decided to sleep, needing a break from the whirlwind of emotions. He lay down, his mind racing, but as he began to drift off, a soft scratching sound at his door jolted him awake. His heart skipped. The familiar sound, scratching at the door, was unmistakable. Max used to do that when he wanted to go for a walk. Confused, the man sat up in bed, blinking into the dark room. Could it really be? The man's chest tightened as old memories flooded back. Could this dog actually be his Max? In the morning, the mystery deepened. When the man stepped outside, the storm had passed, leaving the world blanketed in snow. But as he looked down, his breath caught in his throat. Clear, well-defined paw prints were etched in the fresh snow, leading directly to his door. They matched the dog's steps perfectly. The truth slowly began to dawn on him. Was this truly his old dog, somehow returned from the grave? Or was something far stranger at play here? A chill ran through him as he sat down on the porch, the dog beside him, its eyes filled with quiet understanding. His mind was in turmoil, torn between disbelief and an unshakable sense that something extraordinary was happening. One thing was certain: he would figure it out. He had to. The connection between them was undeniable, and the mystery was far from over. The man sat quietly, his hand resting gently on the dog's back, feeling the warmth of its body and the steady rhythm of its breathing. The storm had passed, and the world outside was calm. But inside, the storm of emotions had settled. He could no longer deny it. The bond between them, whether mystical or not, was real. He had spent years in solitude, haunted by the absence of his beloved dog, Max. And now, here was a creature, so familiar, so right, standing by his side. The man took a deep breath, letting go of his disbelief. Whether this was truly Max returned to him or not, it didn't matter anymore. The dog needed him, and in a strange way, he needed the dog. The loneliness he had carried for so long began to melt away, replaced by a feeling of connection and comfort. As he gently stroked the dog's fur, he whispered softly, "Welcome home, Max." For the first time in years, the man didn't feel alone. He didn't need answers to the mystery. He had found peace in the presence of this loyal creature. And in that quiet moment, he felt whole again. Was it truly a miracle that brought this dog back into the man's life? Or is there something more mysterious at play? Share your thoughts with us in the comments below. And if you love stories like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more unbelievable tales.